Some years ago, a top multinational company was seeking a new CEO. Over 100 candidates applied for the position. The search committee narrowed the list to 5 eminently qualified persons. Then somebody came up with a brilliant idea. Let's send a person to the institutions where each of the 5 finalists is currently employed, and let's interview the watchman and service staff at each place, asking them what they think of the man seeking to be our CEO. This was done, and a watchman gave such a glowing appraisal of one person that he was instantly selected to be the CEO of the company. Somebody on that search committee understood in a flash of genius that those who live close to Christ become so secure in His love that they no longer relate to other people according to rank or power or money or prestige. They treat watchmen and governors with equal dignity. They regard everybody as a VIP. Children seem to do this intuitively. Adult Christians have to relearn it. In Mark chapter 9 verse 32, we read a not so complimentary report on the disciples. But they did not understand. That's a picture that can be hung in the halls of the museum of mankind. When confronted by true greatness, we simply do not see it. Here is what happened with the disciples. One day Jesus is passing through Galilee. We are told that He did not want anyone in the area to know where they were. Why is that? Because He had something important to tell the 12. It was a strategic part of His plan. The Son of Man, He explains, is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill Him. Now listen to what He says next. And after 3 days, He will rise. There it was. The whole plan lay before them. The crucifixion and the resurrection. They should have been curious. They should have asked questions. They could have seen the significance. But the best they could muster up at this crucial moment was a blank stare and a confused silence. They could not understand it because it did not meet what they felt was the measure of greatness. How do we grow to the point that we stop measuring people by their successes and start regarding people for their service, for their sacrifices? How do we move from a world's model which measures value in terms of wealth, fame, and power to a model which measures value based on Jesus' teaching? What is greatness in the kingdom of God? First, let's notice that true greatness is hardly ever recognized. How can we know greatness when we see it? J.C. Penney had a way of recognizing it. He said, "Give me a stock clerk with a goal and I'll give you a man who will make history. And give me a man with no goals and I'll give you a stock clerk." We all understand the point Penney makes. A dream, though hidden in the most common of men, can bring about greatness, but a common man with no dream is just that, common man. There are many ways to measure greatness. Some might say that what makes for greatness is intellect, and they would hold up the example of Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein developed his theory of relativity when he was 26 years old, and therefore some say by any measure he is great. Others would say that what makes for greatness is courage, and therefore Clara Barton should be held up as the standard. During the Civil War, Clara Barton earned the honor of Angel of the Battlefield. Her work with the wounded ultimately led her to found the worldwide organization known as the Red Cross. Therefore, some would argue she is great. Perhaps some would say that one's contribution to humanity is what makes for greatness. If that were the case, then few would argue against calling Jonas Salk a great. It is difficult for us to imagine today the terror that the word polio struck in the hearts of parents. I well remember when I was a child and the vaccine was used on a mass scale in schools for the first time. Of course, in those days, it was not a sugar cube, but an arm pricking. But few can deny that Jonas Salk gave us a great deal. But perhaps it is those who work for peace in the councils of nations or those who fight for justice, as did Martin Luther King. We all have deep within us a desire to be great. We have a desire to be the best at what we do, to excel. No one wants to be no one. But what is it that measures for greatness that will get us there? And how can we recognize it when we see it? Let's leave this question for a few moments and look at our second point. Greatness is never about self-promotion. One day Jesus is walking with his disciples, and as they were walking, they talk among themselves. At the time, they did not realize that he overheard them, but he clearly did, for when they later arrived at their destination, he questions them about it. The topic was, who was the greatest among them? Exactly what they said, we do not know. But I imagine that the conversation went something like this. Simon Peter said, well, I am his right-hand man. I am part of the inner circle. I am the spokesperson of the group. Therefore, I am the greatest. Whereupon Andrew might have spoken up and said, well, dear big brother, let me remind you of something which you have conveniently forgotten. I was called into discipleship first. Indeed, I was the one who invited you to come to Jesus. I got you here. Therefore, I am the greatest. The brothers James and John at this point speak up. You both miss the point. Greatness is measured by the amount that you have sacrificed. We stood to inherit our father Zebedee's lucrative fishing business. We gave all of that up. At this point, Matthew chimes in. Well, if you want to talk about giving up money, I can play that game. I was a tax collector. None of you had as much money as I did. Therefore, I am the greatest. When the 12 arrived at their destination, Jesus asked them what they had been talking about back on the road. It was a question meant for their introspection. Jesus knew what they had been talking about, and with that question, the disciples are strangely quiet. They are embarrassed. It was at this point that Jesus told them, and vicariously us, what it is that makes for true greatness in the eyes of God. If you would be great, he said, be a servant. Jesus taught that heaven will hold some surprises. Honor and glory will be granted for behavior that was so natural, so undistinguished, and so non-competitive. Take the simple illustration that Jesus gives of receiving a child. From somewhere, Jesus finds a small child who stands in front of them. It is interesting that Mark tells us that Jesus stands the child in front of them and then takes the child in his arms. Perhaps he was highlighting how low the child was by comparison. But as he raises the child in his arms, he says to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. Now what does he mean? He is talking about having a humble servant attitude, being willing to reach out and help the lowliest of people so that we might show them the love of Christ. Such simple acts will be greatly rewarded. This leads us into our final point. Greatness is found in service to all. After a presidential debate, a reporter for a news magazine asked a young woman, "What do you think of the candidates?" She did not say a word about their positions on the issues or their skill at debate. She simply remarked, "None of them seems to have any humility." Humility is an elusive virtue. Even Jesus' disciples struggled with it. Ironically, it is immediately after moments alone with his disciples that they discuss who among themselves was greatest. Perhaps they took Jesus' talk about dying to be the language of war and not a prediction of death. Either way, they missed the measure of greatness. Jesus was about to serve in the most radical of ways by sacrificing himself on the cross. In doing so, he was sacrificing himself for their sins and the sins of the world. But the disciples are not listening and they miss the crucial moment. In addition to this, be the act which creates Christianity and shapes world history, there is a lesson, a virtue, a model offered for his followers. You will recognize greatness when you look for it in the humble acts of love shown every day by people who are not interested in self-promotion. And when we fail to recognize this as the measure of greatness, we will find ourselves in the last place. True greatness is not about self-promotion or seeking to be powerful. True greatness, as Jesus describes it to us, is found in humble service. Praised be Jesus Christ.